Hello, I'm Zucaro, if you don't already know me, but you probably do, so I probably didn't need to say that. But there, it's out there again. I am who I am. So today, what am I talking about? Today I'm talking about something that has been coming up a lot in the last couple of months, and that is an appraisal gap. This is something to be aware of whether you are selling a house or buying a house. And this is what an appraisal gap is, and we'll talk about this in the context of the appraisal gap form or appraisal gap waiver, whatever you want to call it. So when you're purchasing a home with a mortgage, your lender is going to do an appraisal on the house in most cases. Sometimes they won't do one, sometimes they'll do, well, I think they always do one, but sometimes they'll do a desk appraisal, and sometimes they'll actually send an appraiser to the house and they will do an appraisal in person. Once the appraisal comes back, if the appraisal is lower than the contract price that you have, whether you're the buyer or the seller, then there becomes an issue. And so what the appraisal gap is the difference between the contract price and what the appraisal came back at. Now, as a seller, if you're selling in this hot market that we still have going on right now, you may want to ask your buyers to sign an appraisal gap waiver or an appraisal gap form, because this will mean that the buyer is going to cover the difference in the value of the contract versus the appraisal. So let's say you have a contract for $500,000, and let's say the appraisal comes back at $490,000. You may ask them to sign an appraisal gap waiver that says that they will pay that additional amount. Now, from the buyer standpoint, if you're the buyer in this situation, please keep in mind that these are pretty common right now because of the fact that we're having so many houses go under contract with multiple offers and so many houses go under contract at above list price, that the sellers are rightfully concerned about this. Now, a lot of the appraisals are coming back at value because there are so many people bidding over asking price on properties. The property values have actually gone up. And as I've talked about before, in the past year, they've gone up somewhere between 8.5% and let's say 12%, depending on the specifics of where you're talking about. But an average about 8.5% or 9% versus the previous 5 years. So a lot of the appraisals are coming back at value because home values have gone up. And in a lot of cases, if there are multiple offers and more than one party has put in an offer at a certain level, that can also help establish the value for the appraiser. Although they do have their own set of rules that are kind of crazy and don't always seem to make logical sense. So even with multiple offers at a certain price point, there's still a possibility the appraisal could come back less than the contract price. So if you're a buyer, you may be asked to sign an appraisal gap waiver, and what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to set a maximum for that. So for instance, I'm going to read you the language on the current version of the appraisal gap addendum that we have, which says, in the event that the above mentioned property appraises below the original contract purchase price, the buyers agree to pay up to, and then this is where you fill in the blank, over the appraised value not to exceed the original purchase price. So what it may say is, the buyers agree to pay up to $10,000 over the appraisal value, not to exceed the purchase price. So again, in a situation where you have a contract for $500,000 and the appraisal comes back at $490,000, that $10,000 would cover the difference between the appraisal and the purchase price, but it would limit your liability as a buyer to not have to pay more than that. So for instance, it wouldn't cover a situation where the appraisal came back at $450,000, because then you still have another $40,000 to compensate for. But I wanted to explain this a little bit because both buyers and sellers are sometimes a little confused about what this means and why a seller would want one, why a buyer might want one, why a buyer might not want one. As a buyer, you may not feel comfortable with that. However, keep in mind that most buyers, or many buyers I should say, are signing these waivers and adding them to their offer. So in a situation where one buyer has agreed to do this and another buyer hasn't, a lot of times the buyer who has agreed to do it will end up getting the property. So this is just one of the many things that's going on in our market today with how hot it is and how quickly moving it is. If you have questions about anything else related to buying or selling a house right now, please don't hesitate to reach out and ask me your questions. I'm happy to answer any questions. And if I get enough questions about it, like I have with this one, then maybe I'll make a video about that one too. So thanks again for watching, and I'll talk to you soon.